Good evening, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight's daf is Maseches Beitzah Daf Yud. I just wanted to share with you some of my thinking for the coming days. I wanted to do more than a blot today, but as you can see, the Amud Beis is not small. So today we're just going to be learning one blot. The game plan is like this. Tomorrow, in Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll learn two blot. Each of them are medium-sized blot. They're not crazy. We'll probably stop at the Mishnah toward the bottom of Yud Dalet. I am okay, if you are okay, doing a short, quick blot on Yom Kippur. Share your feedback as you see fit. And if not, then we will just do a blot and a half every day until we catch up. At night or day? No. During the day. During the day. Like right after. Yeah, like right after Musaf, we'll just sit down, we'll learn a blot. Because I won't be tired at that point. I will. So yes, I will be. So we could do that, or we could just do a blot and a half, chipping away every day. But the problem is that the day after Yom Kippur is a Thursday, which is blot and a half. Anyways, and Shabbos is blot and a half, so we're pushing far into.
The day after Yom Kippur is a Friday.
Oh, it's okay. No. Yeah. Yom Kippur is Wednesday, no?
No.
Yom Kippur is Thursday. So it's not as bad as I thought. Okay, fine.
Let's skip Thursday. About what time would it be on Yom Kippur?
2. I don't know.
Whatever. People don't daven here.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, we'll make a time that's convenient.
Yeah, I think you're
whatever time Musaf's over. Okay, I'll take all of your feedback later, not now. Let's get started. We're right now at a fresh Mishnah on the top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph. This first Amud is a big Shas Sugya, a very well-known Shas Sugya on two fronts. And then the Amud Beis is not a Shas Sugya. It is a comparative analysis between two sources in Tanaim, which we will get through. And we'll be stopping 2 lines from the bottom. Let's get started. There's a machlokas, as we've been learning throughout the entire first parak. We started with our first Mishnah and moved through a number of Mishnayos with machlokos between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Here is another one. Beis Shammai omrim ein motziin loas hakatan v'loas halula v'loas sefer Torah l'reshus harabim u'Beis Hillel matirin. That on Yontif, Beis Shammai forbids one from carrying a child or a lulav or a sefer Torah into the reshus harabim. Now, all of these things it's not like stam carrying. They all seem to have a particular agenda, right? It's not like picking up a rock, which the Gemara will discuss. So these things seem to be things that in theory could have been mutter, but Beis Shammai says they're not mutter. Why does he say that? That's what the Gemara is going to debate. Ubeis Hillel matir, and he says that all of those things are mutter to carry. So says the Gemara as follows, bringing a slightly unrelated topic, but we'll see the connection momentarily. 5 lines down, Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Tani Tana, Kamed Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Someone taught a Mishnah or a Beitzah in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Here's what the Mishnah said. Hashochet olas nedava b'yom tov loke. That if a person does shchita on a korban that is voluntary, then they are going to be chayiv malkos. That is an isur deoraisa. What happened to all of the korbanos that we brought that day, right? We had chiyuvim of the day. So it seems from this Beitzah that only that which is rigidly required by the day is allowed to be done. But had there been an action that was done that really wasn't integral to the day, we would have said that that's forbidden. So then the Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says back to the person who presented this Beitzah, Amar le do Amar lachmani, whose opinion are you quoting? It sounds like the opinion of Beis Shammai. Why? What does Beis Shammai hold? Says the Gemara, and this is a well-known machlokes in Shas, de Amre, they hold, Beis Shammai holds, lo amrinan, we do not say the following, that mitoch shehutra hotzal letzorech, hutra nami shelo letzorech. We do not say that because we allow carrying when there is a need on Yontif, we therefore allow carrying under all circumstances. So that is what Beis Shammai holds, that we do not make that assertion. De'i Beis Hillel, had it been that this Beitzah, which indicates that shechting and olas nadava would be chayav malkos, if that were to have been Beis Hillel, that can't be, because ha'amre, they hold mitoch shehutra hotzal letzorech hutra nami shelo letzorech, because when it comes to carrying, they're very lenient. And hachanami here, by the case of the olas nadava mitoch shehutra shchita letzorech, because you're allowed to bring the korban tamid on that day and the korbanos of the day, whatever they are, the korbanos musaf of that day, there so too hutra nami shelo letzorech. So the Gemara presents this machlokes in the case of hashochet olas nadava to be similar to the larger machlokes of whether or not we have an expansive set of leniencies on Yontif. We know, of course, that Maseches ochel nefesh, ach asher ye'achel l'chol nefesh, hu levado yaseh lachem, that we know that the Maseches ochel nefesh are mutter on Yontif, and they are aser on Shabbos. Machlokes in the Rishonim and in the poskim, even in Shulchan Aruch, how far do we go? Is it milisha ve'elach in regards to the malachos? That's its own discussion about which malachos are mutter and which malachos are not mutter. But the Gemara presents that this Beitzah about hashochet olas nadava b'yom tov, that it has to be that it's according to Beis Shammai, because Beis Hillel would not agree with that, and it's implying that this comes from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah. Let's look back now that we've learned how Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abdimi analyzed the Beitzah of hashochet olas nadava b'yom tov loke. Now we can see that our Mishnah is in fact his answer. What does our Mishnah say? It says that Beis Shammai has a limited scope of what's allowed on Yom Tov, and Beis Hillel has an expansive scope. And he's assuming, Rav Yitzchak bar Abdimi, that this is the machlokes, this is the source, our Mishnah, that according to Beis Hillel, mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach, because the Torah allows under certain circumstances for certain malachos to be done on Yom Tov, so too even malachos which are not essential to the day can be done, and that's Beis Hillel, and Beis Shammai would be the machmir. So says the Gemara almost halfway down, Maskefla Rabba. Rabba asks and says, hold on one second. Mimai de Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel beha pligi. How do we know that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are having this very large conversation about mitoch shehutra l'tzorech or not? How do we know that? Dilma, perhaps, maybe in our Mishnah, they're really only discussing the narrow topic of Eruv v'Hotzah. Because look at the topic of our Mishnah. Ein motziin, lo asakatan, lo asalulav, lo sefer Torah. You can't carry things. So maybe we're not talking about malacha at large. Maybe all we're talking about is whether or not there's an Isser of Hotzah in regards to Yom Tov. Says the Gemara halfway down on Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Dilma, perhaps be'eruv v'hotzah l'Shabbos, ve'eruv ve'ein eruv v'hotzah l'Yom Tov k'miflagei. Maybe they're just arguing about the applicability of an eruv as it relates to Yom Tov. Mar savar eruv hotzah l'Shabbos ve'eruv hotzah l'Yom Tov. According to the Tana Kama, according to Beis Shammai, he'll say that just like by Shabbos there's an Isser of carrying, so too by Yom Tov, and therefore the prohibitions within our Mishnah of Ein Motziin Lo Asakatan Lo Asalulav Lo Sefer Torah. However, Umar Savar, Beis Hillel would say, no, Eruv Hotzah l'Shabbos, I agree, ve'ein Eruv Hotzah l'Yom Tov, but there is no Isser of carrying on Yom Tov. And of course, we paskin that way. We paskin that it's perfectly mutter to carry on Yom Tov, irrelevant of how one normally holds in regards to Shabbos. When we learn Maseches Shabbos, we spoke about the two major directions of Eruv, and one of them is that we are allowed to rely on the types of Eruvin that we have here in Chicago, and the other shita is that we are not allowed to rely on them for reasons not for now. But here the Gemara says, maybe Rav Yitzchak bar Abdimi, maybe you've taken too large of a look at our Mishnah. Maybe our Mishnah is not talking about this expansive mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach. Maybe it's not about the heter of malacha at large. It's only about one sugya, one malacha, about whether or not we hold that there is an eruv, by whether or not there's eruv hotzah on Yom Tov. As the pasuk writes, "Below sotziu masami batechem yom haShabbos b'Shabbos in b'Yom Tov lo." So that's what the Gemara says, is that maybe Rav Yitzchak bar Abdimi is wrong. Maybe the machlokes is not about mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach, about malacha in general. Maybe it's only talking about hotzah, and honestly, that's really what this Mishnah at the top of the page seems to be discussing, because it says ein motziin. It seems to only be discussing that. So says the Gemara, and this is a little bit of strange form for the Gemara. The Gemara answers the maskif with a maskif. People joke it's the classic Jewish move, but in the Gemara we don't normally see this maskifla X, and then the Gemara gives an answer. But here the maskifla is responded with another maskifla. We're 3/4 of the way down or so, and the Gemara responds to this recommendation. You want to say, Rabbah, that maybe the machlokes is in our Mishnah is only talking about Eruv v'Hotzah, where Beis Shammai says that just like by Shabbos you can't carry, so too by Yom Tov. Therefore, we have restrictions in our Mishnah. Beis Hillel does not say that. Maskefla Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says back to Rabbah, they lived at the same time. Ela me'ata, if you're correct that all that we're talking about is carrying, lif legu ba'avanim. If all we're talking about is carrying, pick innocuous samples in the Mishnah. Why are you picking these strange, otherwise strange things, carrying a child and a sefer Torah and a lulav? Just say you can't carry anything. If that's what we're talking about, is that you're not allowed to carry it all, or you are. If it's only about hotzah, so then what about avanim? Just give one sample of a simple thing of not carrying a rock on Shabbos. Ella midelo miflage ba'avanim. But because we see that this Mishnah at the top of our Amud is not discussing stones, it's discussing very specific chiseled out cases, we therefore can assume that it's not talking about what Rabbah suggested, that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in our Mishnah is not about Eruv v'Hotzah, but it's about something larger. Shma mina v'Hotzah shelo l'tzorech pligi. We're talking about Hotzah shelo l'tzorech, namely that we know that Hotzah is otherwise allowed for things that you need. What about things that you might not need? And on that we have our machlokas. So that's what the Gemara concludes, is that if we look back at our Mishnah is not discussing the narrow question of whether or not there's an Eruv v'Hotzah, whether or not we're allowed to carry on Yom Tov, but rather the larger question of if at times we have a heter, mitoch shotra l'tzorech, if at times we have a leniency, can we therefore expand that to a time when we're doing an action that really isn't integral to the day? And with that, we paskin like Beis Hillel leniently that yes, mitoch shotra l'tzorech, shotra nami shelo l'tzorech, but there is no machlokes about Eruv v'Hotzah on Yom Tov. Everyone agrees, seemingly that way. It seems that from our Gemara that way, not speaking in Psak, but it seems from our Gemara that even Beis Shammai would agree that you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara says, according to Beis Shammai.
I think so.
No. Yeah, well, Beis Shammai holds that Beis Shammai does not hold of the principle of mitoch shotra l'tzorech shelo l'tzorech. So you would say you can only do these activities if it's necessary. Correct. But it wouldn't only be carrying; it would be anything, shechita, whatever. Correct. And now that we've posited and concluded that that's really what our Gemara is talking about, Ve'af Rav Yochanan, 8 lines from the bottom, Ve'af Rav Yochanan savar b'mitoch shehotzah hotzah l'tzorech hotzah nami shelo l'tzorech pligi. He agrees as well that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are having not the narrow machlokas about Eruv v'Hotzah, but the larger machlokas about doing a malacha that is mutter when it's integral. Is it also mutter when it's not integral? That's where we see the split Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. And Rav Yochanan agrees that this is the machlokas. Where do we see this? In a very unique case. The Tani Tana Kamid Rav Yochanan. There was a Tana, there was a Beitzah that was taught in front of Rav Yochanan. Here's the Beitzah, 4 lines from the bottom, Daf Yomi Amud Aleph. Here's an example of what not to do if you're trying to be a frum Jew. Hamavashel gid hanashe b'chalav b'yom tov ve'ochlo. Okay, if you cook gid hanashe, which is an iser d'oraisa to eat, and you cooked it in milk, and you did it on Yantif, and you ate it. Very bad start to the year. If you did all of that, loke chamesh, you get 5 separate sets of lashes. Let's see, what are they? Loke mishum mevashel gid stam. There's an isra to cook it, right? You're not allowed to cook the gid hanashe. V'loke mishum ochel gid, and you ate it. That was also not a good idea. V'loke mishum mevashel basar b'chalav. We know the Torah says lo sebashel gadi b'chalev imo 3 times. One is to teach us the isra of cooking it together. One is to teach us the isra hana, and one is to teach us the isra of eating it. So says the Gemara here that this is one of them. V'loke mishum mevashel basar b'chalav. V'loke mishum ochel basar b'chalav. Separate chiyuvim. V'loke, as we turn to the top of Yud Beis and Beis, mishum havara. And here the Gemara it says we're going to be chayiv for havara. So Amar Le, what does Rav Yochanan say back to them? You've made a mistake. You've made a mistake. You're not going to be chayiv on havara and on bishul on yontif. You're just going to be chayiv on one. He says, poke tani livra. Go teach your Mishnah outside. Can you just please get out of the base medrash? Havara ubishul Eina Mishnah. What does that line mean? Take a look at Rashi. The second line of Rashi, we're on Yud Beis and Mid Beis. Havara is lighting a fire. So the lighting of the fire in order to cook that food, the gid hanashe that you cooked. So says the Gemara, says Rashi on the second line, Havara ubishal, the lighting of the fire and the cooking. Rashi says, Havara ubishal de Yom Tov, Eino Mishnah, Lilkos Alehem. You're not going to get lashes on those. Demitoch shehutra l'tzorech, hutra nami, shelo l'tzorech, mina Torah. That on a Torah level, any of the malachos that are part of the cooking process, anything that's part of the tzorech achila, that's not going to be an isur d'oraisa. So that's got to be the opinion of Beis Hillel. The imtim selomar Mishnah, and if you are going to say that someone is actually going to be willing to teach that both the fire and the cooking are separate isurim, who must that be? It must be Beis Shammai, the Amre, who they hold. Lo amrinan mitoch shishra l'tzarach chutronami shelo l'tzarach. They do not hold that malachos that are not integral to the day would be permissible. So that's how Rav Yochanan spins this brisa. He says this brisa doesn't make any sense. And even if you want it to make sense, it would have only made sense if it was Beis Shammai. And therefore we see that he holds that Beis Shammai holds mitoch shehutra l'tzorach, that Beis Shammai does not hold of mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutrami shelo l'tzorach, and Beis Hillel does. And hachanami here in our case as well, lo amrinan mitoch shehutra havara l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach. The Beis Hillel, because had it been that this brisa was Beis Hillel about the 5 malchos, had it been that in general Beis Hillel would have allowed for malachos that are not integral to be done, provided that they were allowed to be done when it was integral, then hachanami here too. This brisa only works according to Beis Shammai. The brisa about cooking the gid anosha in milk on Yom Tov and eating it, that brisa only works according to Beis Shammai, and therefore we see that Rav Yochanan understood that the machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel was not one about eruv v'hotzah, but rather was whether or not we hold of the principle of mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach, that because at times on Yom Tov we're allowed to do malacha X, whatever it is. Therefore, because we have a heter to do it ever on Yom Tov, therefore, even if we do it in a way that isn't integral to the day, it would therefore be mutter. And therefore, Rav Yochanan agrees to our approach that we established on the Amud Aleph. So let's just conclude. If we looked back at our Mishnah on the top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the Mishnah speaks about a machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, about whether or not you can carry Esa Katan and a Lulav and a Sefer Torah Rishus Harabim on Yom Tov, machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. And the Gemara concludes twice over that the machlokas is about whether or not we hold of Hutra L'tzorach Hutra Nami Shelo L'tzorach. Beis Shammai is the Machmir, Beis Hillel is the Mekel. We do Paskin L'kula, but there are some unique applications about that. Some of the famous ones, for example, is like, this is an application of, but showering on Yom Tov is always an interesting shaila. So the reason why is because even though there should be no malacha of the bishul of the water, because mitoch shehutra l'tzorach hutra nami shelo l'tzorach, but we have an added caveat of it has to be shava l'chol nefesh. So back in the day, people did not shower every day. We are mifunakim. I shower every other day. We are mifunakim. And that's still much more than it was back in the day, you know? So here, that's the shaila, is whether or not it's shava l'chol nefesh. So where this really comes up in the poskim is smoking on Yom Tov. That's a really big shaila. Should be mutter, it's bishul or whatever, it's havar or whatever it is. But the problem is it's not shava l'chol nefesh, because it might be usher to smoke according to the Igros Moshe, some tshuvas about it. So these are real shailas in the poskim. It's much less complicated to take a shower on Yom Tov than it is to smoke anything on Yom Tov. That is a big shaila in halacha. Bishul, it's cooking. Even if your shower is only 100 degrees, but you're drawing hot water out of the tank, so it's putting in cold water, it's going to cook no matter what. Yeah, you also can't have the waterless, the tankless waters. Those are their own shilas. Way more difficult.
104 degrees and you happen to fall in.
Right, with shampoo in your hair.
No, you can't fully bathe, remember?
Right, I remember. I'm more curious if you remember than if I remember. You've only made 100 references to swimming on.
It's the only stop I remember.
I don't even know where it is. I'm so glad you reminded me.
I said you're incorrect.
Yud Beis Amud Beis. I'm often incorrect. We're 10 lines down at a new Mishnah. Yud Beis Amud Beis. Beis Shammai Omrem Ein Molichin Chala Matanas LeKohen BiYom Tov. One is allowed to be mafresh chala on Yom Tov. Rashi discusses this. One is allowed to be mafresh from animals that they shecht, any of the 24, the kaf daled matanos that a regular person can give a kohen. You're allowed to separate those on Yom Tov in general. But Beis Shammai says, ein molichin chala matanos lekohen b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to bring them to the kohen on Yom Tov. Bein shehur mumi emesh. If whether or not they were separated last night, bein shehur mumi hayom, or if they were separated today. Ubeis Hillel matirin. Okay, now let's see what the dialogue is about this. Amru lahem Beis Shammai gzeira shava. Beis Shammai says, I have a gzeira shava for you. What kind of gzeira shava is this? The Mishnah doesn't quote any psukim. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi in the Mishnah, just to our left, Dibur Hamaskel Gzera Shava, about a quarter of the way down, Rashi says, Lav Dafka. This is not a real Gzera Shava. Dekula midirabanan gazur. Our whole Mishnah is only dealing on the plane of that which is derabanan. So what is the whole language of Gzera Shava? This morning in Rabbi Shmuel, we probably all read it. Gzera Shava is one of the Yud Gimel Midos Shator Nidrashes Behin, and you can learn Dine Deoraisa from a Gzera Shava. So what is this poetic license that our Mishnah is taking here to call it a Gzera Shava? So Rashi says, Eladumya de Gzera Shava b'derabanan. It's so clear in the context of our Mishnah that we're dealing with Dine Derabanan that you can even take the poetic license of referring to it as a Gzera Shava, even though there are no psukim. It's just obvious. It's just taking a little bit of freedom of speech here in order to make a point. Anyways, what was Beis Shammai's approach? What was he talking about with this Gzera Shava? So Amru Lahem Beis Shammai Gzera Shava, he says, I have the following logic for you. Chala umatanos matana lekohen. We know that one is obligated to give challah, and the kaf daled matanos, the 24 gifts that one can give from animals to a kohen, and also as well the truma matana lekohen. We also know that when one has produce, that they have to give truma to the kohen. Now here's Beis Shammai's svara. Kishem she'ein molichen es truma. Just like on Yom Tov, one is not allowed to bring truma to a kohen. So too, kach ein molichen es hamatanos. So too, one cannot bring over the kaf daled matanos and the challah by extension. That we cannot bring over any of those. So that's the svara that Beis Shammai employs. Comes along Beis Hillel and says, I don't know what you're talking about. Amrullah lahem Beis Hillel. Below. That's not a svara at all. Because look at this distinction. The Gemara this Mishnah is so clear, it's so hard to understand Beis Shammai. What is Beis Hillel's argument? When it comes to truma, it's usher to give truma on Yantiv. Of course, you can't give that to a kohen on Yantiv. You're going to compare that Tomru. You're going to say the matanos shezakai b'haramasa. You're going to say in a case where you are allowed to separate challah and matanos and give them to a kohen. There's no comparison. There's zero comparison between the world of truma, which granted goes to a kohen, and on the other side, challah and the matnas kehuna. Why is there no? Because truma is usher to separate on Yontif, and therefore, of course, you can't give that to a kohen. So Beis Shammai is saying, you can't give the truma to a kohen, and therefore you can't give the challah. What are you comparing? That's a terrible comparison. It's usher to give the truma because you can't be mafresh the truma, but it's mutter to be mafresh the challah and the matnas kehuna. So zero comparison, and that brings us to the end of the Mishnah. Now, Kosal Kadaitach, we're going to make a comparison between this and another very lengthy brisa, which is just below in this middle third of the Gemara, actually the bottom half of the Gemara, I should say. So the Gemara here first presents our Havamina in the Mishnah, Kosal Kadaitach. Of course, we always know that Kosal Kadaitach is like teeing up an answer in order to knock it down. But what is our Havamina? Kasal Kadaitach, what we're thinking at this point is Shehurmu mehayom vishanishchatu mehayom. Even though the Mishnah doesn't use both languages of Hurmu and Nishchatu, it only uses the language of Hurmu. If you look back at the second line of the Mishnah, we saw that Beis Shammai was strict about giving challah and matnos kehuna to a kohen on Yontif, and his language was bein shehurmu me'emesh, bein shehurmu me'ayom, whether or not you separated it today or yesterday. Now, our assumption is that really Beis Shammai meant not only that, but also the shechita of said animal. So let's now, with that assumption, compare and contrast our Mishnah to the following brisa. Mani Masnisen, who is the author of our Mishnah, as we compare it to the following brisa. The following brisa includes in it Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Acherim. Says the Gemara, lo Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yehuda, ela Acherim. It must be that it's not like Rabbi Yossi, it's not like Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not like Acherim. Now, let's see the brisa that depicts all three of their shitas. But we're on the first long line, Yud Beis and Yud Beis, halfway down. We're going to be going to the second to last line on the page, Mir Hashem. And before we do that, let's just review Beis Shammai's answer just to have it clear in our heads before we continue. Look right back at the beginning of the Mishnah, and then we'll come right back to this first long line. Beis Shammai said, Ein molichen chalu matanos lekohen b'yom tov. We're not allowed to give challah and matanos to a kohen on Yontif, bein shehurma me'emesh, bein shehurma me'ayom, whether or not the food was separated today or yesterday. And we added in from the Gemara, the Kasal Kadaitach, and if it was shechted on that day as well. Now, Titania, let's see who that shita is most similar to. Let's first learn the Shita of Rabbi Huda. Amar Rabbi Huda, lo nechlaku beis Shammai uveis Hillel ala matanos shehurmu me'erev Yom Tov shemolichin im hamatanos shehurmu mehayom v'shenishchetu mehayom. So he says that there is no argument in the case between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in a case about the matanos of the kahuna shehurmu me'erev Yom Tov that were selected before Yom Tov, that they can be brought on Yom Tov with an animal that's shechted. That's not what Beis Hillel said. Beis Hillel wasn't talking about that case. Beis Hillel was talking about either case. It makes no difference if it's before Yontif starts or after. Here, we see a difference between before and after Yontif starts, and therefore it can't be like Rabbi Huda. But anyways, let's finish Rabbi Huda's shita. Lo nechleku ela laholichan bifnei atzman. The only question within Rabbi Huda's approach between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is, are you allowed to bring them on their own? Are you allowed to bring the matnas kahuna before Yom Tov without coupling them along with a matnas kahuna from an Yontif? Beis Shammai omrim ein molichin, Beis Hillel omrim molichin. And what would be the argument on each side? What was Beis Shammai's argument to be strict and say that you're not allowed to bring these gifts on their own? So it says the Gemara, quoting what we saw in our Mishnah, the quote-unquote Gzeira Shava, Chala umatanos matana lakoin, utruma matana lakoin, kishem shen molichin es atruma kachen molichin es hamatanos. The same exact argument that he gave in our Mishnah, that just like we don't allow for us to bring truma to the Kohen on Yom Tov, so too we don't allow for the Chala and the matnas kahuna. Amru lahem Beis Hillel, lo, you've totally misunderstood. Again, this is a near verbatim quote of our Mishnah, though it's in a Beitzah. So this is how Rabbi Yehuda narrows down the machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. We're only talking about whether or not one is allowed to bring the separated matnas kahuna from before Yantif began. Can I bring that on their own, or can I only bring them conjoined with a matnas kahuna on Yantif? That's the machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Yehuda doesn't match with our Beis Shammai. No, here is option 2. We're I don't know, almost 2/3 of the way down, 10 lines or so into the wide lines, a little bit less. Amar Rabbi Yossi, let's try the second Tana of this Mishnah and see if he compares to the Tana of our Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yossi, lo nechlaku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel al hamatanos shemolichin. There is no machlokas between Beis Shammai that you are allowed to bring the matanos. Done. Now we know Rabbi Yossi doesn't match with our Beis Shammai. Our Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to bring them, and Rabbi Yossi says you for sure are allowed to bring them. Lo nechlaku. So where does Rabbi Yossi say the machlokas? This is shita is not important for our comparative analysis anymore, but let's learn the rest of his shita. Lo nechlaku Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue only ela al hatruma. They only argue in regards to truma. Shebeis Shammai omrim ein molichin, ubeis Hillel omrim molichin. That according to within Rabbi Yossi, that Beis Shammai holds that we cannot bring truma on Yom Tov, and Beis Hillel says molichin. That kachayu Beis Hillel done it. How would Beis Hillel argue that you are allowed to bring the truma? Chalo matnas umatanos matana lakohen. We know that when it comes to the hafrashas chala and the matnas kahuna, that those are gifts to the kohen. Utruma matana lakohen, and as well truma can be given to a kohen. Kishem shemolichin es hamatanos. And just like one is allowed to bring the matanos, they can bring the matnas kahuna to a kohen on Yom Tov, kach molichin es truma, so too one can bring the truma. We would have to assume in this case that the truma was already separated, because it's usher to be mafresh truma on Yom Tov. It must just be that it was separated in advance of shkia, and then you're only bringing it on Yom Tov. And what did Beis Shammai say back? Amar lahem Beis Shammai, lo. Beis Shammai says back to Beis Hillel, no, that's not right. You can't bring truma. I know that when it comes to the matnas kahuna, that you're allowed to separate those out on Yom Tov. That's fine. But when it comes to truma, you're not allowed to be mafresh truma on Yom Tov. So how, Beis Hillel, are you comparing these two things? So these are the first two shitas. Now we already had the foreshadow of the Gemara that we know that the shita of Acherim is the shita that's going to most align with our shita of Beis Shammai. That too will be questioned, but let's at least learn that for now, 2/3 of the way down, almost halfway into the wide lines, Yud Beis Mud Beis. Acherim Omrim, how does Acherim look at this sugya of the matnas kahuna? Says the Gemara, lo nechlaku Beis Shammai uVeis Hillel al hatruma she'ein molichin. There is no machlokas about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in regards to truma. They both agree that it's usher to bring truma. Lo nechlaku ela al hamatanos. This sounds almost exactly like our Mishnah. If you look up at the top, it sounds exactly like our Mishnah. So let's keep a line here. Lo nechlaku ela al hamatanos, and then just scan back up at our Mishnah. That Beis Shammai says it's allowed, and Beis Shammai says it's not allowed. Beis Hillel says it's allowed. Beis Shammai omrim ein molichin, that you cannot give the matnas kahuna to a kohen on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel omrim molichin. Oh, so lema acherim hi velo Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe we should say that the Beis Shammai of our Mishnah most aligns with the Shita of Acherim, where we're discussing giving the matnas kahuna to a kohen on Yom Tov. Seems like a hand-to-glove match. It seems very good. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava. No, because remember how we started our Gemara with a Kosal Kadaitach? So we teed up an answer, we teed up a Havamina. Now Rava is going to reject that. And Rava is going to say apples and oranges. Mikatani shehurmu mehayom vishenishchatu mehayom. Does our Mishnah say shchita? Why are you inserting your assumption that shchita was done here? Maybe the shchita was done well before Yom Tov, and we have no comparison at all. What does our Mishnah say? Shehor muktani ulolam shchitasan me'emesh, and maybe the shchita was done beforehand. And really, the whole brisa here of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Acherim is totally not relevant in comparative analysis to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is not dealing with a case where the shchita was done on Yom Tov, and the brisa is dealing with a case where the shchita was done on Yom Tov. Also, if that's the case, says the Gemara, then Rabbi Yehuda's shita kind of comes back into play. If that's true that the shechita was done beforehand, so if we were to look back up at the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, we may have more of a comparison because he speaks about this in the beginning of the brisa. To understand this properly, look back at the first line where Rabbi Yehuda quotes the shita, the first of the wide lines. What does he say? Let's go to the third line. Lo nechlaku ela laholichan bifnei atzman. Yes, without shechita. Yes, exactly. So maybe that is where we have a comparison between Rabbi Yehuda and not Acherim. Says the Gemara, no, that's not right. Afilu tema Acherim. Really, what we could be talking about is uvahanach denishchetu me'emesh. Maybe in all cases, maybe even Acherim would agree. We're talking about the shchita was done yesterday. But then if that's true, then the shita of Acherim and Rabbi Yehuda are very similar. And that's what the Gemara asks. Ihachi hainu Rabbi Yehuda. If what you're saying is that according to both of them, the shechita took place before Yom Tov began, and both Rabbi Yehuda and Acherim are saying that the only machlokes is about whether or not we can bring the matnas kahuna on Yom Tov, then Rabbi Yehuda and Acherim are the same thing. So says the Gemara, Ika beinaihu tfela. This is going to be the difference between them. Yes, you're right. According to Rava's understanding of this brisa, which we tried to compare to our Mishnah, the way that Rava understood it is that no shechita was taking place on Yom Tov at all. And really, it's not a perfect match to our Mishnah in that way, or at least I should say, it rejects the Havamin of our Gemara that we were talking about a case of shechita that was done on Yom Tov. And the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Acherim is Ika beinaihu tfela. What does that mean, Ika beinaihu tfela? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi is about 20 lines, maybe 20 plus lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschil tfela. Rabbi Yehuda matir letapel ulaholich shel emesh im shel hayom. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he allows for the matnas kahuna from yesterday, from before Yom Tov, to be coupled with matnas kahuna of today, to be tafel, to be secondary to that which is being brought on Yom Tov proper, and that's allowed. And Rashi continues in the third line of Rashi, Dibur Hamaskil Tfela, Ve'acherim, but the other sheet in the Mishnah holds, Sabre Da'afilu L'tapel Nami Asre, even if it's going to be brought as a corollary, as a secondary to a matnas kahuna on Yom Tov, that as well would not be allowed. That is the difference between them. How do we paskin? Well, I know we tried to compare Beis Shammai both to Rabbi Yehuda and to Acherim. We don't paskin like either of them. We paskin like Rabbi Yossi. That's what the Gemara says. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yossi. And what was it that Rabbi Yossi said? So if you scan back up into the middle of this brisa, Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that the only machlokas was in regards to truma, where Beis Shammai says you are not allowed to bring truma to a kohen. You certainly can't separate it. The only question is, can you bring it? And Beis Hillel would allow you to bring it. The Gemara tells a quick story. We're about 15 lines from the end of the page. Rav Tuvi Breid Rav Nechemia have a garba de chamra de truma. He had like a flask, like a leather type of flask of wine that was made of truma. Asa lekame de Rav Yosef, and he came in front of Rav Yosef. Remember what we said. The wine is truma.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. What did I say? Oh yeah, no. No. No, the wine. We're referring to the wine. Sorry. Garba de chamra truma. The flask has wine in it that is truma. Asa lekame de Rav Yosef. They went in front of Rav Yosef and Amar le mahu le'am tive lekohen ha'idna. Can I bring it to a kohen today? Remember what we just said. We paskin like Rav Yossi that the only machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in this sugya is whether or not we're allowed to bring truma to a kohen on Yontif. Beis Hillel was mekel, and Beis Shammai was machmir. So Amar le hachi Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel halacha Rav Yossi. We can be lenient because we hold like Rav Yossi, and we always hold like Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel within Rav Yossi and within. Beis Hillel within, who was it? Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, within Rav Yossi, that's mutter. You're allowed to do that. Oh, so that's taka the din. And we see the Gemara, that some of the Rishonim discuss this, that when the Gemara gives a psak and then gives us an uvda, gives us a story, it actually strengthens the psak of the Gemara more than, let's say, you just had an Amora saying we hold like X, and another person says, no, we don't hold like X, we hold like Y, and bididi have a uvda, I have a story. So when you see a short maisa like this in the Gemara, this little short story about the flask of truma wine, it really emboldens the shita of Rav Yossi that we actually paskin like him. Okay, let's learn one more sugya. It's really primarily unrelated. Ushpezichne de Rava bar Rav Chanan havale asuraisa de chardula. The host of Rava bar Rav Chanan, he had a bundle from a mustard bush, the mustard seeds, and they were all enclosed in some type of, I guess, kind of like beans are enclosed. I always thought mustard grew just a mustard thing on its own. Apparently, this bush did not grow that way. Amar Lein, and he said, the host asked a shaila, Mahu lifruche umechal minahu biyom tov. Am I allowed to break these open and eat them on Yom Tov? So lo hava biyode. He didn't know the answer. Also the kame de Rava. They brought the shaila in front of Rava, and Amar Le, and this is a quote that we have learned in Maseches Shabbos, molelin melilos umefarchen kitnios b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to like roll them in your hand and kind of crack them open that way, and that would be okay on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos, but it would be permissible on Yom Tov. Eisve Abaye. Abaye says to Rava, hang on one second. Hamolel melilos me'erev Shabbos. L'machar minafech miyad liyad ve'ochel. You're allowed to, crack it up before Shabbos, and then next day minafech miyad liyad. You can kind of switch hands, and all of the chaff will slowly fall away. That's fine at all. Avalo bekanon v'lo b'tamchui, but you can't do it on a plate of any kind. Hamolel melilos, and this is more our case. Hamolel melilos me'erev yom tov. One who does melila on Erev Yom Tov, that's allowed, no problem. L'machar minafech al yad. Here the Gemara says that you can like you can blow on your hand that has in it the chaff and the actual mustard seeds in it, which is what you want. Ve'ochel afilu bekanon ve'afilu b'tamcho, even on a plate. Aval lo b'tabla v'lo b'napa v'lo b'kabra, but you can't use a sophisticated type of sieve or colander or something that would cause this. Is like regular rules of borers that you can't have a special cleat. So what's the diuk from this brisa? Rava had told us that molul and melilos, even on Yom Tov, that you're allowed to roll them in your hand and crack it open. You can crack open the mustard seeds even on Yom Tov. That's fine. But the diuk from this brisa is me erev Yom Tov in be Yom Tov lo. Because the language that Abaye quotes from the brisa is very clear. Let's read it again. This line is 6 lines, 5 lines from the bottom. Hamolel melilos me erev Yom Tov. So how can Rava say that it's on Yontif if Abaye has a brisa that it's not allowed on Yontif? Says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom and the last line for the night. Afilu tema b'Yom Tov. Don't worry, the brisa that Abaye quoted is not a kasha on Rava. Why not? Because the aidi detana reisha me'erev Shabbos. Tana Seifa Nami Me'erev Shabbos, a famous line that we see in the Gemara, that in order to keep language consistent, to make Mishnais easier to memorize, the Reisha, which spoke about Shabbos, where Melila on Shabbos is not allowed, where rubbing it and crushing it in your hands is not allowed, that's taka true that on Shabbos it's usher, so the Brisa wrote Me'erev Shabbos. And when it came to the Seifa, when we switched gears from Shabbos to talking about Yom Tov, because the Reisha was talking about Erev Shabbos, the Seifa did too, but really, Rava's right, and we are allowed to roll them in our hands and crack them open. We're going to stop right here by Im Kain. Emir Tashem, tomorrow we'll learn Emir Tashem Tublat. I hope so, Emir Tashem, and we'll figure everything out. We'll still finish Daf Yomi on the same day when we get to June of 2027, but I don't know how this week is going to yet work out. I'll keep you posted. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
I have a